he's deceased now. His name was Ted Stevens, and he secured so much money to build this massive bridge in Alaska. It was going to bring all this revenue into Alaska, but the town only had like 1,800 people in it. They didn't even need the bridge, but it was going to bring in lots of jobs. And there are certain states that disproportionately have a ton of pork, and some that have very, very little. Yes, sir.
What do they call pork?
I think it comes from bringing home the bacon. That's what I've always equated. Have y'all ever heard that phrase before? So it's like, you go off to work and you bring home the bacon. So the congressman is going off to D.C. and they're bringing it home for their people. So, okay? So are we good with that? All right, let's keep going then. That was such a funny video. I just love it. Okay, whoa. All right, so we're going to watch another video clip. So what did I say has to happen? If we get to October 1st and the budget hasn't been passed, what do we have to do? The government shuts down, or we what? Continuing resolution, right? That still has to be approved by the president, okay? So I don't know if any of you ever watched this show. It's called West Wing. It was it's old now, but it was basically like Washington D.C. So this is an example of them engaged in that kind of debate. Please understand this is Hollywood and this can't really happen, but it's awesome. Okay, so here we go. That's the president.
Bob. Mr. Speaker, Senator.
I want to thank you, Mr. President, on behalf of my colleagues. None of us think this is a perfect deal. No one likes to see the sausage made, including the guys who make it. But this is an expression of willingness by both sides to keep all avenues open to an eventual resolution.
Yes, thanks, Robert, and thanks for saying it this time. I think I had to make that little speech the last time around. Or maybe the time before. This is our third CR, our third time coming up short. We got to do better. People aren't paying us to duck the hard choices. You want to run through the details, Angela?
An act of Congress. Continuing resolution to extend no later than January 3rd, midnight, to include a reduction by 1%.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I'm sorry. There's been a change. I know we talked about a 1% cut. It's going to have to be 3%.
Mr. Speaker, nothing like this was even mentioned, much less.
Hold on. I'm sorry we couldn't get more notice, but we just came from our conference, and I had significant opposition to only 1%.
Only 1%.
Yes, sir.
We had a deal at 1%.
But now my members have to go back to their districts for the holidays, explain why we kept the gravy train running with a rising deficit and an economy crying out for tax relief. It's an economic situation that calls for action, not status quo spending. The 3% may sound painful, but it's only for 2 months. It'll show we're serious.
What's next?
Sure.
In 2 months, 5%? 50? How many rounds did we go, Jeff? I'm just asking.
There is no next, sir. Not to get too technical, but this government runs out of money at midnight, and my guys have gone home. This is it.
No.
There is no altering this offer, Mr. President.
And I said no.
Let's be clear, sir. We cannot, we will not vote to keep on footing the bill. You will be held responsible for shutting down the federal government.
Then shut it down.
All right. That was awesome. Okay. So, what that does is that should illustrate to you the role of the president and the Congress, okay? Tell me why a modern president is not going to have the whatever to actually do that. Why would a president not say, shut her down?
It affects too many people.
So if Congress shuts it down, though, it affects the same number of people. So why, you're right, but why is it different when Congress causes a government shutdown versus the president?
Just one person doing it.
Do you see that? When you can disperse the blame over 535 people, you can very effectively blame the other person. In fact, there are many times that Congress does it and they blame the president and they shift the responsibility to him when the budget hadn't even gotten to him in the first place. And yes, he could have been a leader and he could have helped to organize his party and there are things he could have done influentially, but legit, real power-wise, couldn't have done anything about it. Okay? So, in terms of their roles, definitely Congress does play more of a role. Could the president do that? 100%. The president could refuse to assent to the budget. That video clip was approving a continuing resolution, but it could also be the same for just getting to October 1st and just like the budget bill, like any of it. So both chambers of Congress must pass it. It originates in the House. It must go through the Senate as well, in the same fashion. And the president does have to approve it, just like any old regular House bill becomes a law. The consequence is, though, if the president doesn't pass it, then there's no money that's been allocated. Okay? All right, awesome. So let's see what we've got to look at next. Okay, so what I want to look at here is the two different kind of look at where we get our money versus how we spend our money. And so you didn't need to write this down specifically. I just want to kind of talk about like what all of this means. So the committee that is in charge of writing the tax code in the House of Representatives is called the House Ways and Means Committee. So ways and means in which we get our money. And yes, you do need to know that, okay? Remember I told you that Congressman Johnson is on that committee, and it's actually really powerful. It's an important committee. What this pie graph shows you, it was the House Ways and Means. What this pie graph shows you is where do we get most of our federal money. So I thought it was kind of interesting. So the blue, about 47% of the money that our federal government brings in comes from the income taxes that we all pay. So when you look on your paycheck and it says like federal withholding, that's what it's talking about. And I'm going to show you how income taxes work. Payroll taxes, that's Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So that's different because that comes out of like everybody's paycheck at the same percentage, and that goes to fund Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It doesn't go to fund all the other things. It's specifically just targeted towards those programs. About 11%, or 11 out of every $100, it comes from corporate income tax. So I think a lot of people kind of misperceive that, and they think that corporations are paying a lot more money in our country. That doesn't mean they're not paying a lot of money. $342 billion, that is a lot of money, but in terms of percentage, it's about 11%. We have other taxes at the federal level. Excise taxes, you kind of talk about this more in economics. Excise taxes are, sometimes we call them sin taxes. They're usually taxes on behaviors you want to discourage. Cigarettes, I hope none of you know this, but the taxes on cigarettes are astronomical. They're super expensive. And if you go back like 20 years ago, they weren't. But as more and more evidence came out about just like how ridiculously bad for you cigarettes were, they started raising the taxes on them incrementally. There's this huge federal tax, and it's an excise tax. So regardless of what Walgreens sell cigarettes, I don't know. Regardless of what Walgreens charges you, they have to pay that same tax. Alcohol has an excise tax on it, gasoline, just things like that. We have excise taxes in our state, but the federal government does collect some as well. We tax customs duties, so things that are, like imports and, that kind of stuff. But really the bulk of it comes from income taxes. When we categorize taxes, there are 3 different ways that taxes can impact you. You definitely need to know this, and they will not teach you this in economics, and you need to understand it from a voter perspective, but also just from a, on this test. Taxes can be classified as progressive, regressive, or proportional. Okay? So I'm going to talk about progressive first, because progressive was, if you look back at the chart, the income tax is nearly half of the money we bring in comes from our income tax, and we have a progressive income tax. What is it that created the income tax? You learned this in U.S. history. It's on the paper right in front of you. 16th Amendment. So we have a progressive income tax in this country because of the 16th Amendment. Do you guys remember what time period it was when we passed that? Don't remember a date, but what was going on in the country? Teddy Roosevelt. worker protection, factory protection, trust busting. Do you remember what we called that time period? Progressive. So it's a progressive era. So think about the culture of the progressive era. Who were we trying to protect during the progressive era? Middle class. So we have this growing middle class. So the progressive era said, we're going to take sure that we take care of this middle class. So it is no coincidence then that the progressive income tax was created then. If you look at income tax, this is just like a general, okay? This isn't hard and fast. If this is your income in a year, between $0 and a little over $9,000, you will pay 10% of your income into tax. If you go up here in the middle and you make about $100,000 a year, there's like this shows you kind of how complicated it is, and I did that on purpose because I want you to see how convoluted it is. But do you notice that the percentage just goes up, right? So if you're the wealthiest, if you're making over $400,000 a year, then you're going to pay 40% of some of your income. So not all of it, so it's not completely 40%, but it obviously rises. So a progressive tax means as your income goes up, the percentage that you pay into tax also goes up. So it takes your income into consideration. Does that gel with what you think about the progressive era? We wanted to take care of those greedy political bosses and those robber barons and like all of those people who had been basically like people felt like they were manipulating, and they were just like there was so much wealth, and we said we got to even this out a little bit, and rich people can afford to pay more. It's been that way ever since. Sometimes we are more progressive, sometimes we're less progressive. It depends on the Congress and what they do to the tax code. It gets adjusted and changed, okay? But that's basically how it works. Are we good? Okay. We also have in this country something called regressive taxes. So this is a cheesy little illustration, but it does a good job of showing. So we have these two people, okay? This man makes $10,000 a year. This woman makes $50,000 a year. If they pay taxes on corn, in some kind of, it appears to be canned meat, I don't know, and gasoline, right? They'll pay taxes on all those things. Sales tax, excise tax, well, just like taxes on things they consume. Well, that, if they pay a 7.5% tax on those items, and they both end up, say, paying $750 into tax, or they pay like $750 into tax, this is going to take 7.5% of his income. It's only going to take 1.5% of her income. So if, what is your name? What's your name? Brittany. Okay, Brittany and I are at the mall, and we both see a pair of boots, and we love this pair of boots. We're like, oh, gotta have them. And the boots are $100. We're each going to pay 8.5% income or tax, or 8.5% sales tax, right? So we'll each pay $108.25. But I am a poor teacher, and she happens to be a lottery winner. So when you look at the percentage of my income, it's going to be significantly larger than it is hers. We both pay the same dollar amount, but it's harder for me to pay because it takes more of my money. Anytime you tax the value of stuff, it's regressive. Food, gasoline, cigarettes, alcohol, a car, like when you have to get a tag on your car, that's a tax. A driver's license is a tax because you have to pay to drive. Speeding fines, property tax, I think I already said that one. Like everything you tax the value of stuff. So think about like what you know. So if we look back at our chart at the federal level, there's not a lot of values of stuff there. Okay, imports, maybe excise taxes. But where do we tax a lot of value of items in our country? At what level of government? Say it louder, whoever said it. State, at the state level. So every time you tax something, so that's like why in Texas we don't, I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you buy groceries, like you don't pay tax on milk. You don't pay tax on apples. But if you buy Snickers, you pay a tax on that. So we give